I'm Ed Biden, one of the co-founders of Hustle Badger, and today we're going to talk about opportunity solution trees. Now, before I get going, just to tell you a little bit about Hustle Badger, we provide super practical advice, support, and training for product managers and digital builders. Um, the opportunity solution tree I am going to show, kind of talk you through with, is one of the templates that we've got on the site. And if you like this session, you're going to love the templates we have on our site, the articles, and also the courses we have on discovery and strategy. I'll stick a few links in the chat as we go through. But what I want to do today, if you give me a moment so I can share the right screen, is I'm going to talk you through a very kind of like nuts and bolts approach to opportunity solution trees. So, sorry, give me one moment whilst I sort my sharing out. Here we go. There we go. There we go. Okay. So I should also mention, just on a note of housekeeping, we are recording this session, so it'll be on our YouTube channel afterwards. If you need to drop off early for any reason, and I will also share the link to the this template is in the chat. I've just stuck it in the chat if you want to get it. But what I'm basically going to do this session is talk through. Oops this template for opportunity solution trees, how they work, to give you a general overview. Now, I should kind of flag two things. Like, firstly, opportunity solution trees, they are a bit like spaghetti bolognese. Like everyone has their own recipe. This is our recipe that we found very effective. It's not exactly the same as, say, Teresa Torres' recipe for opportunity solution trees. She was the first one to come up with these, or other people's. But the broad brushstrokes are the same, absolutely. Secondly, yeah, if you do have questions, please do drop them in the chat, and I will try and answer them as best possible. That's obviously one of the benefits of coming to a live session. So please do make it interactive. But with that, let's dive in. So opportunity solution trees, yeah, at their highest level, these are a visual way of mapping out your strategy and discovery. And they're therefore a tool that help both you think through where you're going to spend your time, like where you're going to spend your time, both doing more research, more investigation, and where you're going to spend your time building things. But they're also a really good way of getting input from other stakeholders. That might be other people on your team, your designer, your engineers, or it might be communicating with other stakeholders, depending on the level of detail that you want to go into. And if you look at the diagram, then you can see that there are basically four layers. This is a very simplified opportunity solution tree, but we'll dive, to keep it simple, we'll go through the details. So at the top, you have your outcome. This is sort of like the results that you are hoping to get by doing some work. So this could be your goals or your OKRs. Like, what is the impact you want to see happen? The next layer down, you've got your opportunities. So what are the problems we could solve for our customers that might deliver this outcome? Below that, you've got your solutions. So this is sort of like what could we build that might solve these problems, that might deliver these outcomes. And below your solutions, you've then got your assumptions. So what are the things that need to be true, or what are the risks that we've got when we think about the solution that we may want to investigate before we actually start building? So we'll talk through each of these layers one at a time, just so you can understand them. In reality, when you are building these sorts of trees, then it's not a purely linear process, right? You don't necessarily just start at the top, work through, and you're done. This is going to be an iterative process where you probably do start at the top and then sort of start working your way down. But as you start working your way down, you're actually going to realize that, you start thinking about solutions, you need to go back and kind of reframe your opportunities. Maybe your opportunities make you rethink, well, what actually is our goal here and where should we be aiming? Or you get new bits of information which then kind of change how you think of whole branches. So this is not a kind of purely, as with everything in product, it's not a purely kind of linear process. It's very much an iterative one. Um, and that also means that, when you start drawing these things up, don't worry about it too much, like the structure. Just start getting your thoughts down. And as you start working on it, then it'll become easier to kind of tease things out and go into detail where you need to. And you'll find naturally that some of it so that you're like, actually, this is less important. And that is actually a good thing, right? It allows you to focus on the bits that are important. So you can see there's this kind of like there's two versions of this. As I say, this is the simplest version of this that you're going to get of an opportunity solution tree. So like one object or one outcome, one opportunity, one solution, and then a set of assumptions. In reality, you're probably going to have multiple opportunities. You're going to have like multiple solutions for each opportunity, and they're all going to have assumptions. So this is just a simplified version. But we've done two versions of this. One version which sort of shows you the theoretical definition, like what does it mean? What should we do here? And one which shows an example so that between the two, you get a really good understanding of what are we trying to do here. Okay, so let's dive into the outcome. So, by the way, and if I'm kind of the wrong level of zoom, as it were, you can't quite see what's on the screen, please do again just stick something in the chat and I can zoom out or zoom in so that it's easy to understand what's going on. So, your outcome, this is, yeah, where are you trying to get to? What's the goal for your team? So, I like to think of this very simply as a combination of a mission and metrics. That's how I like to kind of define goals, because that's a really effective way of defining things. That the mission, that's your kind of qualitative, inspiring statement about what you're trying to achieve. So that is, yeah, it's kind of emotional. It gives people that kind of like um, feeling that you're trying to achieve, as well as because it's qualitative, it can be a little bit more all-encompassing. However, a mission on its own can is imprecise, right? You don't know how much progress you've made. So I like to pair it with metrics or a measure. Metrics are really good because they're very precise, right? You know exactly like how far you've gone from A to B. What they're not good at is kind of describing the whole ambiguity of the whole kind of scope of what you're trying to do, because metrics are, by definition, they are kind of one dimensional. So pairing a mission and metrics together allows you to have the best of both worlds. You can sort of say, hey, what we're trying to do is this, and we'll measure progress in this way, and we'll kind of balance those two off. Now, the metrics, I'll give you an example of what these might look like, but I just want to highlight the kind of the format that I use here. So I always use this format: move metric from baseline to target by date. And this format is really effective because it means that you don't end up setting a metric which you then can't measure, or it's ambiguous when you're going to deliver it by. And so it sort of protects against some of the really common failure modes I've seen product teams making. So as a CPO, I'd often be doing quarterly planning with teams, and we'd be discussing what their target was. And they say like, oh, we're going to increase conversion 10%. I'd be like, okay, sounds great. But firstly, what do you mean by conversion rate? Like, between which steps are we measuring conversion rate? So that's the kind of the metric bit. What's the definition? What is that right now? So what is the baseline? Because often teams would find out that they wanted to set as a metric something they couldn't measure. And if you can find out what the baseline is, you can measure it. So that kind of protects against that. And then the date means that you know what kind of time frame you're dealing with. So it's not ambiguous about whether this is a quarterly goal or an annual goal or anything else. So what does that look like in real life? you might have something like this. This is I have to say, this is a rather plain mission. Increase our user base. We want to be the best social media app in the world. We want to be the best recipe website going, that sort of thing. So this template you can find. I'm just going to dump all the links again. Um, but if you follow the one that says more on opportunity solution trees, the second link down, that's going to have the link to this template. Um, on the metric side here, grow monthly active users from 80K to 120K by March 31st. So you've got that, your definition, monthly active users, you've got your baseline, 80,000, you've got your target, 120,000, and you've got your date, March 31st. So that's kind of where you will start off. Once you've got that, you can look at your opportunities. So this is sort of like most simply thought of as customer problems that you can solve. However, it's not strictly customer problems. So why do I say that? If your goal is to increase revenue, so maybe your goal is to increase revenue 30%, great. Um, you could do that by solving some customer problems and therefore getting more customers. Or you could increase your prices by 30%, right? So in general, you're going to be solving customer problems. That's how product teams usually deliver financial impact. But you shouldn't overlook that there are also opportunities, which may be the way you package your product or internal, ops, things like this, which actually don't change the user experience at all, or may even make it worse, but have the desired business impact that you are looking for. So your opportunities are, yeah, how do you map these out? How do you find these? The ways I think that you can kind of find opportunities, like you may know some already, right? As soon as you start kind of working on a product, you probably have some kind of intuitive feel for the users, which is a great starting point. But if we're product managers, we want to be, driven by data, driven by kind of facts, and so good ways of kind of feeling out opportunities are kind of these four things. So, like, firstly, like going and speaking to users directly, going and asking them, um, what do they want? What will they pay for? What is looking at how they currently do tasks and workflows, and seeing where the friction points are. Doing user tests on your funnel, on the the flow through the product, and seeing where they get stuck. You can then back that sort of thing up with behavior analysis. So you can see in the data which features people are using, which features people aren't using, where they're dropping off in the funnels, that sort of thing. Third way, like process mapping. So if you create a service blueprint or any kind of visual diagram that maps out processes, systems, touch points, these are great ways of spotting where there's complexity or kind of like jarring experiences or inefficiencies that you can improve. And yeah, you can also just go and speak to subject matter experts, particularly B2B. And effectively, yeah, that worked because subject matter experts, having worked in the field for so long, sort of have almost internalized, the first three things. And you get a bit of a shortcut just by going and having a quick conversation with them. So that they're often like a really good starting point, which you can then go and double check and dig deeper into with these other three. So that's a really good way of finding opportunities. You then need to prioritize them, right? Because you'll probably find that you could have, you know, three, four, five opportunities. Which one do you decide to do first? One of the benefits of doing an opportunity solution tree, right, is that you don't have to think of, you don't have to go and look at 100 different solutions, right, and prioritize those. You can prioritize higher up the tree and say, like, actually, let's just think about one or two opportunities we're going to look at, and then we'll only look at the solutions underneath them. We're not going to look at the other branches, because they're tackling other opportunities. So to prioritize these opportunities, I like to do a few different things. So you can sort of impact model it. So that's a really good way of looking at it. So it's having a um, often a fairly simple model in a spreadsheet where you can see, okay, what are the drivers here? What's been it? How much have we changed things with similar features in the past? What do we see as the difference between our best and worst performing cohorts? These are all great ways of coming up with a quantitative model. And this is not going to be a an exact forecast of how much um, you know impact you'd get by solving this opportunity, but it is going to give you a better understanding of like what is like the range of possibilities and what's a reasonable um, range you might see, and therefore what's a relative difference between different opportunities you're looking at. And that's there's always going to be uncertainty, right, when you do this prioritization, but it's going to help you kind of navigate that uncertainty a little bit better. Um, I definitely go and look at customer factors. So again, when you spoke to your customers up here, when you did those user interviews, what did they say about the severity? As in, like, how important is this problem or is this opportunity to them? Is this like their number one thing? Is this something they're going to like leave the product, or is this something that's a kind of minor annoyance? And a really good way to test that out, especially in B2B, is I ask them how much they would pay to solve, if that opportunity, if you were going to add a functionality that completely resolved that problem, how much would that be worth for them, or what's their budget for solving that? You can also look at incidence or frequency. So if you go and speak to 100 customers, what percentage of them actually see that problem? And those two things, incidence and severity. So how big a problem is this? And how many people does this affect? That then allows you to triangulate quite nicely, on the customer side, at least, how important it is. I should say that's not the only things you should think of, though, because you should also think about company factors. Like, does this fit with your strategy? Does this fit with what other teams are doing? Does this fit with like the marketing strategy or how you're positioning yourself and your business model? Like, it's not just about what do customers want, but that is a large part of it. And you should also have one eye on market factors. So, as in, how is the industry moving as a whole? What are other competitors doing? Where are other competitors strong? Where are you strong relative to your competitors? And how do you want to position yourself against them? So, all of these things you can kind of like factor into your prioritization. When I lay out opportunities like this, so I'll often do it as a kind of, I want to, I need to. So very similar to like a user story or how might we, these are all kind of like classic framings for product managers. And I'll put the evidence for like how I prioritize this kind of like near the opportunity. So anyone else can see what the evidence is, or I can remind myself how strong the evidence is. Is this like two or three conversations we've had with customers, or is this an A/B test we did on a previous feature, right? And so that evidence should then justify whatever your prioritization is. Is it as simple as high, medium, low? Do you want to get kind of like more granular than that? That's up to you. So as an example, opportunity here, we want to help users recognize the value the product offers ASAP. So we want to reduce the time to value. And we might have some customer interviews here. We might have some behavior analysis. We might have some competitor, analysis as well. That's the sort of thing you might put here. Again, this is when you're comparing opportunities, when you've got multiple cars looking like this is unlikely to be black and white about which one you should prioritize. This is always going to be an art. What you're trying to do is just lay things out visually, so it's a little bit easier to see which of these makes more sense. You'll also find that as you start to lay this out, you know that where are the dividing lines between opportunities, a lot of these things are going to be interlinked, and that's fine, right? You just want to kind of try and tease it out as best possible. Um, and I'd also say that, the evidence that you have down here, this is obviously going to be, um, you're going to add to your evidence when you actually ship things. When you actually ship features, you'll see what their adoption is, you'll see what impact they had. That's either going to reinforce how big an opportunity you think this is, or it might actually detract from you. Say like, hey, we thought this was a big opportunity. We released a feature we thought would be a slam dunk here, and nothing happened. So actually now we're not sure this opportunity is as important as we thought it was. Um, so again, I'm just going to dump the links back into the chat as someone else is asking for the Miro board. Again, this is in the second link down. If you go onto the um, opportunity solution trees link, you'll be able to get this template. So that is opportunities. If you've got questions about these kind of like top levels, please do jump in any moment. I'd be happy to answer questions. But let's also dive into solutions. So your solutions, these kind of branch off each opportunity. Where you say, like, okay, we've got this opportunity, we've got this kind of customer need, or we've got this business problem that we think we can solve. Because you might have internal stakeholders here, right? You just say, like, as the ops team, they want to be able to do something, right? But you then have things you can build that will help you address this opportunity. So, um, where do these solutions come from? Well, actually, sorry, let's go over like, what does this look like? So you probably state your solution, at least initially, as a bit of a hypothesis. So we believe, this feature X will encourage this type of user. Maybe that's everyone, maybe it's power users, maybe it's first-time users. You could have different segments here to do this thing. Okay, so that's going to give you then that and this action should clearly kind of indicate that their need is then met and should have a kind of plausible mechanism back up to like moving the metric that you've targeted, right? So if this kind of like action does not link back to your outcome, this is not a good solution. This is not going to like do what you should be. And something's gone wrong in your logic, either because this opportunity doesn't really deliver against this objective, or the solution does not deliver against this opportunity. Again, quick example here. We believe adding motivational questions pre-sign up will encourage users to complete the onboarding process. So great. What are we going to build? We're going to think about adding motivational questions, and we can see if that works, that should help users recognize the value of the product. And if we can do that, that's going to increase our user base because people will stick around for longer. Okay, so that's the kind of mechanism that we're kind of that we've got a hypothesis for there. So where do these ideas come from, or what do they look like? So good solutions, I think, come from a mix of two things, right? You've got a really good problem or a really good opportunity, right? So you've got that objective for success. You've got some kind of diagnosis of what's going wrong. So you've got evidence, right? You've done some analysis, you've spoken to users, and you also got that context of that kind of company strategy, market trends, industry trends, all of that sort of stuff coming together. So all of the stuff above your solution, your outcome, and your opportunity, and then you're going to kind of mix that with good inspiration. And good inspiration, look at competitors, look at cross industry references, look at kind of abstract inspiration, art, architecture, nature, that kind of thing, and also do this with a diverse group of people. So when you speak to people with very diverse viewpoints, you're going to get a broader range of um, ideas here, and therefore you're more likely to find some really like great ideas. So if you have the time and if you have the kind of the team, what you want to do is pull together a designer, at least one engineer, like maybe some people from some operational teams, or marketing teams, or sales teams, as well as yourself, and then have a think about like, okay, if this is the opportunity that we've got up here and that we've prioritized, and this is our goal, what might we build down here? Like, given all of this evidence that we've already kind of gathered. So that's kind of what you're doing. And generally, you've got a good solution set when you've got a broad range of options to choose between, right? They all look like they're going to create some value. They all have that kind of like sense that you're going to address this kind of opportunity there. And they're also impactful. So you think that as we talked about, that there's that chain back up to the outcome that you actually want to happen. So Alex is asking, Teresa doesn't like brainstorming in groups. What do you think? Um, I think it depends how well prepped you are. So I'm a big fan of things like design sprints. A design sprint doesn't need to be a design sprint, right? It doesn't need to be a kind of like a week long process as defined, in the book kind of thing. But basically, having this kind of context or this briefing about like what is the problem, and then getting a diverse group of people together, and um, on the basis of a shared kind of fact base, thinking about ways to solve a solution, I have found hugely, hugely beneficial. I think where brainstorming doesn't work is when you don't have that briefing, you don't have that kind of evidence base, and you're just sort of saying, hey, let's get in a room and just have some like general thoughts on how we might, what we might build next. In that case, it can be a little bit counterproductive because you're kind of papering over the fact that you don't have any research, you don't have any fact base just by getting a bunch of people together. And that's then just a waste of people's time. Once you've got your solutions, then you can move on and you can go down to this assumptions bucket. And I'd say, like, opportunity solution trees, they're also valuable when they are incomplete. So um Teresa adds yeah, assumptions down at the bottom. Like, even if you just get to the solution stage, um, that is going to kind of be better than not having this at all, right? Even if you just use it to kind of prioritize between opportunities, that is going to be useful in its own right. But the more kind of levels of detail, obviously, like the more useful this can be. So I like to map out the assumptions. I think assumptions is really useful because when you're depending on how big these are, right? If these are just little things, you're like, hey, we can build this in 5 minutes with Claude Code. I mean, how much do you care about the assumptions? Like a lot less, right? Because the cost to build is less. But if you're talking about, well, this is quite a big change, to the positioning, or this really fundamentally changes the user flow, that's a little more risky. And you might want to think through the kind of the risks and the assumptions you've got before you commit to it or before you even test it, right? But your assumptions, I sort of think you can kind of like come up with a bit of a matrix here. You've got your different types of risk, whether you use your kind of Marty Kagan's four risks or your IDEO's three risks or whatever. There are different, we can all agree, there are different types of risk, value, business, technical, usability. So you've got different classes of risk here. So value is like, do customers actually want this? Business, can we actually deliver this? Is this profitable? Technical, can we build this? Usability, do people know how to use this solution, right? So you've got your different risks there. And then the other thing I like to do is kind of like map this out by saying like, okay, well, what is the risk? Like, what evidence do we have that this is a risk, is not a risk? Like, why are we worried about this? And therefore, what is the next steps? Right. So how would we test this or how would we reduce this risk? And for me, the trick here is not that we kind of, fill out all of the boxes for everything and have a complete, have 20,000 post-its. Like that's generally actually counterproductive. It's more that you've got this mental model where you can think like, okay, so for this solution we're talking about, where are the major risks? Because there's probably like two or three things that might really kind of blow it out of the water. Is that a value thing or are we pretty secure on that? Is it a technical thing? Great. Let's just focus on the kind of the types of risks that are actually a problem. And then let's think about kind of what do we already know and what do we want to know? So this is a way of prioritizing your discovery. Um, and so again, the success of this is that you have two or three tests that you want to go and run. It's not that you've got a comprehensive list of every potential risk and downfall for your feature. Okay, so you might end up with something that looks a bit like this. So we have this again, go back to this kind of suggestion here. We're going to add motivational questions pre-sign up. So sort of like, why are you signing up? Is it because of this or that? Or um, are you looking to get more time back in this way or more time back for that? Are you looking to save money this way or like that? That's kind of what we're looking at here. So Here, there might be a value risk. Adding questions to the flow has no positive impact on motivation. There might be a business risk. Well, not really. Limited business risk. Great. Technical, nah, this is pretty easy to build. Fine. If this is a limited technical risk, you see, like, we don't really need to think about the evidence in the next steps because it's not really a risk. But for value, we're like, should we even build this? Well, then we can have a think about, like, okay, what is the evidence? Well, we've seen this in other, we've seen this written up in behavioral science books. We've seen other companies using it. We've never tried anything like it ourselves. Okay, so there's some evidence there, but yeah, we might want to test this. Do we just go and build it? We might just go and build it because this isn't very difficult to build and run an A/B test. Okay, in this case. So that is how this might kind of pan out for real. Um, so yeah, that's kind of how the assumptions come together. I'm going to pause there. We've kind of like run through the whole thing now, kind of like a first pass. Um, any questions on how this all kind of comes together? Do I have time recommendations for each step? Um, Not really, because I think this is one of those things which you can spend as much or as little time on as you want. If you went and sat down with a piece of paper or at a whiteboard or a Miro and did this, I think you'd be able to have something that was kind of worth sharing with other people within about an hour or maybe 2 hours. Can you then um, you know spend hours and like days and weeks on it? Yeah, absolutely. If this becomes the primary sort of document or artifact that you're using with your team to align on your strategy, align on what you're building next, like then this is something that you're going to keep spending time in. I think that's really the like you've got to ask yourself, like, again, this is a framework, it's a tool for alignment, for communication, for decision making. Is this just for you or is it for other people as well? And is this a sort of like one-off exercise that you want to do as a way of kind of checking your thinking for your plan that you're going to store somewhere else? You've got a written document for it, right? Or a roadmap or something. Or is this like a living document that you want to be using as the primary way your team thinks about discovery and what you're building? Because both are valid, right? There's no right way of using it. Um, you just don't want to go to kind of, you don't want to kind of like pour 2 weeks full time into building a super detailed opportunity solution tree and then never look at it again because that's not going to be a good use of time. Um, do I have advice for scaling or using this with Claude Code? I mean, I do in the sense that I saw someone build one of these in Claude Code, and maybe I'll even see if I can dig it out really quickly. Um, maybe that's a task for another day, actually. So I have seen someone build a software version of this in Claude Code pretty rapidly, like within a day or two. So if that's your jam, that's your thing, then yeah, using the latest AI coding tools, you don't necessarily need to do this in Miro. You could do this in, build a kind of like little custom sheet for it. Uh, Nastia's asking how to limit the number of solutions per opportunity if you brainstorm too many. So I think this is the same when you're prioritizing anything, right? I would think about each of these layers here. We've shown like outcome one layer, opportunities one layer, solutions one layer. In reality, you can kind of have multiple like opportunity layers where you've got a little hierarchy. You can have like multiple kind of solution layers where you've got different kind of clusters of solutions. Um, Again, I just think about how useful that is. That's going to be useful if you've kind of got one opportunity and then you've got 100 potential solutions off it, then um, I would think about how do you cluster those solutions into maybe like 3 or 4 groups and decide which of those clusters are going to be most useful, and then just prioritize the solutions in that cluster first and ignore everything else. If you've only got 3 solutions, well, don't bother putting like 2 of them into a cluster and having another layer of hierarchy because it's just going to kind of make the whole board more complex. So I hope that answers your question, Bestia. So the things that I would say, usually, another good thing about opportunity solution trees is that they help you kind of spot visually some fairly common flaws in logic that product teams make. So, for example, we talked about this one a little bit. If you have a solution you're thinking of building, you're really excited about building a feature, but actually it doesn't address an opportunity, or that opportunity that it does address does not link to your actual, your objective. That should be fairly obvious from the chain here. And that's a really good way of like not building something that is everyone's very excited about because it sounds like a cool feature that isn't actually going to, get you any closer to the goals that you've got set. Um, Melissa's asking, how would you recommend using this with data scientists and machine learning engineers who default to the solution as a model? Yeah. I mean, I think you can generally like that may be the case, right? But um that's a bit like saying the solution is is software. It's like, well, yeah, we're all digital product managers, so of course the solution is software. But what are we actually talking about doing here? Because when we're talking about improving a model, we're probably talking about like quite specific changes to the model at the solution level. We're going to add more aspects to it. We're going to add, more structured data. We're going to do whatever. Like there'll be some technical things that we are going to build, but that should still deliver against a customer problem or a company opportunity in a way that we expect is then going to deliver against this objective. So I think you can still force it through the same logic and say, like, look, we can't avoid this chain of reasoning, even if we think the answer is a model. The answer may well be a model, but what we want to make sure is that we're focused on the right problem and the models that we're building, we're thinking about the right improvements to the models, um, that address these opportunities. We're not just going to build like any model. Yeah, so Alex, you're asking like what happens when you're getting pushback? Not everything needs an opportunity. Um, I would so I guess maybe you can give a little bit more context here and happy for you to come off mute and just talk it over. Are you talking about like, maybe a kind of a salesperson being like, we just need this feature. We don't need to go through this whole frameworks thing. Is that sort of
Um,
situation you're talking about?
yeah, it's kind of like that, Ed. So yeah, senior leadership is very much like there's this like thing we need to build it. Like it's going to be valuable, you know, and yeah, I'll say maybe like, oh well, we actually haven't seen any customers asking for this thing, or any users really like hitting that problem, and they'll kind of reply being like, well, just because like we haven't found it's a problem doesn't mean it's not a problem.
Yeah,
If that makes sense.
absolutely. Look, and this is fairly common, right? So I think I'd be quite careful about sharing an opportunity solution tree with like sales and marketing people unless you've already won their trust. Because if they already, have a dim view of product or don't kind of like subscribe to product management, which a lot of salespeople don't, they're going to see a lot of post-its on a board somewhere and be like, this feels like a waste of time. Can we go and make some money, please? So the way to tackle that, I think, is to translate the discussion into their terms, and it's less of a kind of opportunity solution tree than question, and more of a how do you work with salespeople and a credibility question. But in that case, I'd basically be like talking to them about just feeling out like what makes them convinced that this is the right opportunity, right? And you don't have to say like it in those terms. Be like, oh, yeah, that's an interesting idea. Like, is this something you've seen in another company? Is this something that our competitors are building? Is this something customers are talking about? Just try and understand their perspective a little bit, um, because they probably come to that answer to a reason. And if they really haven't, that's fine as well. But you've kind of like clarified there's no evidence for this. I would just like then translate what is the build time and the opportunity cost into financial terms, and say, yeah, because effectively the conversation you want to be having is like, look, I'm not being difficult, but you want us to build something that's going to take us 4 weeks. That's the equivalent of spending £50,000 of engineering time building something, and you have zero, evidence for this. So, you know, honestly, would you, give like 50 grand of your sales budget like on this? Because if you're really convinced, sure, maybe we can do that. And some things are going to be judgment calls, but let's just have an honest conversation about like what financially is at stake in there. So that's the other technique I'd use. Um, is that helpful, Alex?
Yeah, that's really great. Thank you, Ed.
Yeah, great. Um, and we've got a question, do we use OSTs at Hustle Badger or other frameworks that we find more useful? So this really depends on the almost like what is the level of strategic question we're answering. So I find opportunity solution trees are really good for what do I call it, like almost like quite high level strategy. Um, because I can say like, okay, we've got a problem, maybe we've got a problem, we want to boost our subscriptions. Great. Um, at that level, we can then think about like some quite different opportunities we might want to address. Like maybe we want to put more value into the subscription, maybe we want to improve our onboarding process, right? There's lots of different routes we can go there. If we've decided though that actually this is really about the onboarding process, if I want to dig into that, I'm probably going to switch to a different tool. I'm probably going to use a customer journey map and actually map out the user experience, like screen by screen or, touch point by touch point. Um, this is a little bit of a personal preference, right? I kind of for those more tactical, like more detailed discussions, I prefer customer journey maps, and the kind of slightly higher level strategy questions, I prefer opportunity solution trees. But this is whatever helps you have the conversation and get to the right answer. Because again, this is not about having a perfect, diagram on a Miro board. This is about kind of building stuff that actually does have impact for your customers, and that means having the right conversations with your colleagues. Super. Happy to answer any more questions. Again, I've shared the links in the chat a couple of times. So if you do want to get this Miro board, you can find it on the Hustle Badger site. You can also just look for it. It's in the Miroverse, and so you'll find it there as well. There's a Figma version as well if you prefer FigJam. Um, but we do have, as I mentioned briefly, like articles that talk through this. We've got some courses that dive into opportunity solution trees and discovery and strategy more generally. So those are worth checking out if you want to go a little bit deeper. And then if you enjoyed this webinar, we've got more upcoming talks on our Luma page, which I also shared the link with. And the recording for this will be on our YouTube channel, along with all the other videos that we've got from other webinars. So that's worth checking out as well. Great. Well, if there's no more questions, I will finish up there then. Thank you very much for coming along, and hopefully see you soon.
Thanks very much. Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Cheers.
Ed.
Bye.